The gavel fell again, echoing like a heartbeat through the silent courtroom. Amara adjusted her papers, eyes steady on the judge. "Please, rise," Whitmore said, his voice sharp, deliberate. She did slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. "You may present your argument," he added, though his smirk said otherwise. Amara's lips pressed together. She opened her folder, then paused. A silence stretched, thick and watchful. "You seem young for this level of responsibility," Whitmore continued, eyes narrowing. "Perhaps someone more qualified should handle this." A murmur rippled through the spectators, but no one spoke. Amara looked directly at him, calm, measured. "My qualifications have never been in question. Only your perception has." He blinked once, almost imperceptibly, then leaned back in his chair. The clerk shuffled papers nervously, avoiding both their gazes. Whitmore's jaw tightened. "Bold," he said, almost a whisper, but audible enough. "Very bold." Amara's mother's voice echoed faintly in her mind, the quiet strength she had carried through injustice. She inhaled slowly. The courtroom felt smaller somehow, as if the air had shifted. The reporters held their pens in midair, witnesses shifted in their seats, and the audience waited, suspended in tension. Whitmore's eyes flicked briefly to the gallery, catching the gaze of a young intern who dared to meet his stare. He looked away, and the flicker of unease crossed his face. Amara lowered her folder gently. She didn't move. Further, didn't speak more. The gavel rested in his hand, but the authority it had carried felt fragile now. A pause, just long enough to hold everyone's breath. Then, quietly, she sat. The room waited, sensing that this trial was no longer just about law, it was about reckoning. Amara's hands rested lightly on her folder. She didn't flinch. "You seem young for this level of responsibility," Whitmore continued, voice low, deliberate. "Perhaps someone more qualified should handle this." A faint shuffle ran through the gallery. Someone coughed nervously, glanced down at notes. Amara's eyes didn't leave his. "My qualifications have never been in question," she said softly, almost a whisper, yet clear enough for the whole courtroom to hear. "Only your perception has." The judge's brow tightened. "Perception? Bold. Very bold." She leaned forward just slightly. "Perception does not make truth false, sir. Your view does not rewrite reality." A clerk shifted uneasily, paper rustling. Murmurs rippled in the back, stifled quickly by the room's tension. Whitmore's jaw clenched. "I have decades of experience," he said, voice sharper almost, trembling. "I know what I see." "I do not question your experience," Amara replied, calm. "I question the choices you've made while hiding behind it." Silence settled heavier than before. Witnesses blinked rapidly. The reporters paused, pens hovering over notepads. Whitmore's fingers drummed briefly on the arm of his chair. His eyes flicked toward a young intern who dared meet his gaze, only to look away quickly. "You are accusing me publicly?" he said, the words breaking slightly. Amara's lips curved faintly, just enough to hint at quiet satisfaction. "I am stating the truth, sir. That is all." A slow exhale escaped him. The gallery waited, holding its collective breath. In that pause, something in the room shifted. An invisible balance tilting, the authority of the gavel challenged not by anger, but by steady, undeniable calm. Amara stepped forward, her heels soft against the polished floor. Whitmore's gaze swept over the room. "Is there hesitation?" he asked, voice cold, pointed. A clerk's fingers fumbled with papers. Another lawyer shifted in their seat, eyes darting downward. Amara's voice was calm, deliberate. "No hesitation from me, sir." He leaned back, smirk returning, though smaller, restrained. Yet the room feels uneasy. Perhaps my presence is too much for some. A murmur ran through the spectators, quickly swallowed by the tension. She didn't respond immediately. She watched the subtle flinches, a reporter avoiding eye contact, a witness clutching their notes a little tighter. Each movement told her, more than words could. "You all watch, silent," Whitmore said, voice low, almost a growl. "You know better than to interfere." Amara's lips tightened. "Or maybe silence is what's easiest for you, sir." The judge's hand tapped lightly on the arm of his chair, almost imperceptibly. "Bold words again," he muttered. Whispers rose briefly in the back. One clerk exhaled sharply, looking anywhere but at the front. Another attorney glanced at a colleague, then shook their heads subtly, resigned. Amara's eyes remained fixed on Whitmore. Comfort in silence does not make injustice invisible. For a long moment, he didn't speak. His authority felt smaller in the face of her composure. The gallery shifted again, the tension palpable. Amara could feel the room changing. Subtly, the energy tilting away from him, though no one dared speak aloud. Finally, she lowered her hands, waiting. The quiet said more than confrontation ever could. The balance of power, once unquestioned, now trembled in a room full of turned-away faces. Amara adjusted the papers in her hands, her eyes still fixed on Whitmore. "You carry yourself well," he said, voice tight, forcing a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "But dignity doesn't change the facts of this courtroom." "I do not confuse dignity with power," she replied quietly, letting the words land slowly, like stones across the room. "Power can exist without justice, sir, but it cannot survive truth." He leaned back, fingers drumming the arm of his chair. "And what truth is that?" Amara inhaled deeply. "The truth of what you overlooked, what you ignored, what you silenced. Not just me, not just my mother, countless others." A clerk coughed softly, eyes lowered. The gallery held its collective breath. Whitmore's jaw tightened. "Accusations now? This courtroom is not for stories of old grudges." "Not grudges. Records. Files. Names that never mattered to you," Amara said, her voice calm, deliberate. "And yet they still matter. They are here. They have always been here." He exhaled sharply, trying to regain composure. "You speak as if generations depend on you." "They do not depend on me," she whispered, barely audible. "They depend on truth being seen, on justice being remembered, and if one voice can make a difference, then it is enough." A hush filled the room, heavier than any gavel. Whitmore's eyes flicked to the young intern, the court reporter, the gallery. He saw eyes unwilling to meet his, faces silently acknowledging. The shift he could not control. Amara lowered her gaze for just a fraction of a second, letting that weight settle. The arrogance that had filled the room moments ago now faltered, pressed back by generations of silenced voices embodied in her. Quiet resilience. Amara folded her hands over her notes, letting the moment stretch. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "You speak with confidence, but confidence does not equal correctness." Her gaze never wavered. "Correctness is not determined by who holds the gavel. It is measured by truth, sir." The gallery held its breath. Clerks shifted, papers rustled, faintly. A reporter's pen hovered midair. "Bold words," he said, jaw tight. "Perhaps too bold for this courtroom." Amara tilted her head slightly. "Bold or necessary?" "Necessary because silence protected what should have been questioned decades ago." Whitmore leaned back, fingers tapping the arm of his chair. "You speak as if decades of judgment can be undone by a few words." "They can be," she said, softly. "If words carry what was silenced, they can. If justice finally has a voice, even one, it begins to shift the balance." He swallowed, eyes flicking to the young intern in the corner. The intern looked away, uneasy. The subtle shift did not escape Amara. She measured it quietly, noting the room's subtle tilt. "Do you truly believe your calmness will intimidate?" he asked, voice tight. "I do not seek to intimidate," she said. "I seek only to state fact. My qualifications, my work, my evidence, none of these are in question. Only your perception is." Whitmore's hand twitched. He exhaled, almost a whisper. "Perception? It seems to have betrayed me?" The courtroom remained silent, but a tension lingered, heavier than any gavel strike. Faces that once turned away now watched, hesitant. The balance had shifted, quiet but undeniable. In her restraint, Amara held authority, and the judge's control began to unravel imperceptibly, yet completely. Whitmore's hand hovered over the gavel, then dropped slightly. "You have grown bold with words, Ms. Johnson," he said, voice tighter than before. Amara did not flinch. "Boldness is what truth requires, sir, not permission." He inhaled sharply, the familiar smirk strained. "And you presume that one voice, one argument can undo decades of judgment?" "I do not presume," she replied evenly. "I merely state that the record, once hidden, is visible now. Silence does not protect you anymore." A clerk's pen rattled softly. Someone cleared their throat, nervous. Whitmore's eyes flicked around the courtroom, searching for an ally, a reassurance, but found only attentive faces. You misunderstand the weight of my role," he stammered, leaning back, trying to regain poise. "This courtroom does. Not bend to sentiment or history." Amara tilted her head, quiet and deliberate. "It bends to truth, sir. History is not erased by comfort. It is only deferred until someone chooses to speak." He exhaled, thinly, a crack forming in his composure. "You speak as if generations hinge on your courage." "They hinge on recognition," she said softly, letting the words settle in. The thick air. Not courage alone, but acknowledgement of what was overlooked, what was dismissed. The gallery's eyes were drawn to him, noticing the faint tremor in his hand, the slight slack in his jaw. Whispers that could have erupted moments ago stayed locked in tension, watching the small fracture grow. Whitmore's authority wavered, not loudly, not dramatically, but the room felt it. His mask of command, polished over decades, had a hairline, cracked now. And though he still sat in the seat of power, everyone could sense that control was no longer absolute. Amara's gaze lingered on the papers in front of her, the transcripts folded carefully. She inhaled slowly, letting the courtroom adjust to her rhythm. "You may recall, sir," she began, voice steady, "that decades ago a similar case came through this chamber. A woman, my mother, sought justice and received none." Whitmore blinked, jaw tightening. "That is ancient history. It bears no weight on the present." "It bears the weight of lessons ignored," she replied softly. Her voice was silenced. The law looked past her dignity. Today we confront not just one act, but the echo of all that silence. A murmur ran through the gallery. Lawyers exchanged glances. The clerk's hand froze mid-note. "You presume to connect past grievances with my current rulings?" he asked, voice pitched low, defensive. "I connect truth to consequence," Amara said, her eyes unwavering. "Every decision leaves a mark. Every silence accumulates. You enforced law, yes, but selectively. You protected yourself, not justice." Whitmore leaned back, a faint tremor in his fingers. I cannot be held accountable for every perceived slight from decades ago." "You are accountable to the truth, sir," she countered. "Not just to yourself. and history listens, whether we acknowledge it or not. My mother's story is not just memory, it is precedent. Ignored once, it should not be ignored twice. The courtroom held its breath. A reporter's pen scratched quietly. One by one, the gallery straightened, tension settling into recognition. The past, long buried in files and whispers, pressed against the present, and even Whitmore felt it. The weight of every dismissed voice, every muted plea, every injustice he thought was safely behind him. The room's atmosphere shifted imperceptibly, silently acknowledging that something greater than authority was speaking through Amara's calm, deliberate words. Amara folded the transcript slowly, letting her eyes sweep the courtroom. "Notice the pattern, sir," she said, voice even. "These are not isolated events. Decisions made, voices ignored, dignity dismissed. Each time, the system looked away. Each time, someone like me had to bear the weight." Whitmore cleared his throat, trying to steady his composure. "I have followed the law. That is all anyone can expect." "Following the law?" Amara's tone sharpened, just slightly. "Or following convenience? Protecting yourself while silencing those who rely on justice?" A clerk shifted in his seat, pencil pausing mid-note. The gallery stilled, even the bailiff seemed to hesitate. "You presume to lecture a sitting judge?" Whitmore said, voice rising an octave, but faltering under the weight of the room. "I presume only to speak the truth," she replied, calm and unflinching. "And truth is louder than authority when authority refuses to listen." From the back, a reporter whispered almost to herself, "She's right. Every word." A young attorney glanced sideways at a colleague. "Have you ever seen him like this?" "No," came the hushed reply, barely audible. Whitmore's hands gripped the edge of the bench. The smirk had faded, replaced by the first cracks of doubt. He opened his mouth, closed it again, as if the words he wanted to say had lost their meaning. Amara's gaze didn't waver. Each breath, each pause, each deliberate gesture reinforced the shift. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand recognition. Yet recognition came anyway, silently, in eyes lifted, whispers held back, and the subtle, irreversible tilt of power toward what was right. The courtroom, once a fortress of unquestioned authority, began to feel human again, fragile under truth, fragile under history, fragile under her calm insistence. Amara leaned back slightly, letting the courtroom breathe around her. "That is all I have to present," she said softly, though each syllable carried years of restrained fury. Whitmore's eyes flicked away, tracing the ceiling, the empty corners of the room, anywhere but the weight in front of him. "You presume to judge me with history?" "I do not judge you, sir," she replied evenly. "I only point out what history has already recorded. You can hear it, ignore it, or let it sink in. The choice is yours." A murmur ran through the gallery. A clerk's pen hovered above paper, frozen mid-note. Even the bailiff straightened, unsure if he should intervene or remain still. Whitmore's hand twitched on the gavel, not striking, as if the instrument had lost its power. This is highly irregular," he muttered. "You say that as though truth were irregular," Amara said quietly, letting the words settle in the room like smoke. "As though speaking it here could disrupt your comfort, but comfort built on silence is always fragile." From the back, a young attorney whispered, "Did you see his hand?" "I did," the colleague replied, barely audible. "Never thought I would see it falter." Amara's eyes met his for a fraction of a second, unflinching, unwavering. I'm not here to break you," she said. "Only to ensure what should be heard is finally heard." Whitmore inhaled sharply, jaw tight, knuckles whitening. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Every person in the room held their breath. In that silence, It was not victory, nor defiance, nor even judgment. It was anticipation, the calm before, the unraveling. A pause that held everything at the edge, where the truth would either crack the walls of power or slip quietly through them. Amara shifted slightly, letting her folder rest on the podium, eyes steady. Your Honor, if I may, there is one detail previously overlooked. Whitmore's hand clenched briefly around the gavel. I fail to see the relevance, he said, voice taut. It is relevant because it exposes a pattern, she replied quietly. Not mine, not the court's, but yours. Decisions made, names forgotten, voices silenced. That history cannot be hidden here. A hush fell. Even the reporters paused mid-scribble. Lawyers glanced at one another, realizing the shift. Whitmore's lips pressed together, a muscle twitching in his jaw. You intend to suggest— I am not suggesting, sir, Amara interrupted. I am presenting. And the presentation itself carries weight, regardless of your willingness to accept it. The gallery shifted subtly. A young clerk, usually fastidious in deference, met her gaze and nodded imperceptibly. Others followed, not in defiance, but in acknowledgement. You cannot— Whitmore started, faltering. His authority, previously assumed absolute, felt, suddenly measured against a truth he had ignored for decades. Authority is not granted by fear, Amara said softly. It is measured by justice rendered, and history will hold us accountable, each one of us, even those seated in robes of tradition. Whitmore swallowed, silent. His hands hovered above the gavel but did not strike. The courtroom, once an extension of his control, seemed to tilt in subtle ways. Amara's eyes did not waver. This is not personal, sir. It is principle. And the principle is stronger than any fear or legacy you have built. A deep, taut quiet followed her words. Every presence in the room felt it. The trial itself reframed, the scales of judgment no longer solely his to command. In that moment, the court became a mirror, and he was reflected in it unshielded, on trial as much as the case he presided over. A reporter leaned against the railing, voice low. Did you see that? Whitmore? He faltered. Another scribbled in a notebook, glancing over his shoulder. I know. It's like suddenly he's human, not untouchable. A clerk, hesitant, whispered from the stairwell. I thought I imagined it, but everyone felt it, right? That silence, that weight. The first reporter nodded. Exactly. For years, no one dared. Now even the air feels different, like it's waiting for someone to speak up. A young lawyer passing by stopped briefly. We've all protected him even when we shouldn't have. His voice was barely above a whisper, but in the corridor it carried. Protected him? The clerk echoed, tension in her tone. By ignoring what was obvious? By letting fear dictate behavior? Yes, the lawyer admitted. And for what? Decades of decisions unchecked, lives overlooked. From the corner, another voice murmured, almost guilty. Do you think now is the time someone could actually call it? The first reporter's pen paused mid-scribble. Call it? Hold him accountable, said the voice. Not loudly, not in court. Yet, but this, what she did, it's opening a door, and it's only a matter of who steps through first. Silence settled for a heartbeat. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Each person felt the shift, the hallway no longer neutral, the air charged with quiet possibility. The clerk exhaled slowly. Maybe it's not untouchable anymore. The lawyer glanced toward the main courtroom door. Maybe history is finally listening. The whispering stopped. Each person carried a fragment of courage now, unspoken but undeniable. Fear had begun to crack. Silence. once a shield for him, was now a mirror reflecting their own conscience. A young clerk rifled through a stack of dusty files, muttering under her breath. "Look at this. Dismissed. Again. And again." An older colleague peered over her shoulder, voice low, almost weary. "It's been like this for years. Every complaint, every report, filed and forgotten." The clerk's hands trembled slightly. "How many lives are just lost in these piles?" "Too many," the older colleague said, glancing toward the hallway where the whispers had begun. People thought the system protected them, but really, it only protects him. Another clerk, hesitant, leaned against the door frame. "You think anyone notices? Outside these walls?" A reporter who had slipped in quietly shook his head. No one cared enough to look. Until now. Until her. The first clerk closed a file slowly. Every dismissal, every ignored piece of evidence. It's a pattern, not mistakes. A history. The older colleague's voice tightened. And the law pretends it's neutral, pretends it's blind. But it has seen everything, and it chose silence. I can't just leave it here," the young clerk whispered, as if speaking too loudly could awaken the past. "You're not leaving it," the reporter said gently. "You're remembering, and someone will finally see it. Someone will understand the weight of all this." Pause fell over them. Each file seemed heavier than the last, every name a reminder. The older clerk finally said, almost to herself, "Decades of decisions, of silence, of protection. It built him, but it also built this. And she gestured subtly toward the courtroom door. "She's breaking the chain." The young clerk exhaled, a quiet resolve forming. "Then it's time someone reads all of it, every last dismissal." The reporter nodded, pen poised. "It's all coming to light. The law may have turned its back for decades, but not anymore." A clerk leafed through the worn transcripts, her fingers trembling. "Listen to this. The mother shows little concern. The father cannot be trusted." That's every case in this pile. The older archivist shook his head slowly. No one cared to see who they were. Just labels. Just problems to dismiss. A junior assistant peered over the stack, voice tight. "They didn't even get names. How do you fight when the system refuses to call you human?" The older archivist exhaled, eyes haunted. "That's the point. They disappear in the records, and the decisions. They only reflect him. Not them, not their lives." The clerk's hands clenched a folder. Decades of voices silenced, stories rewritten to suit one man's view of the world. A reporter scribbled quietly, pausing. These people, they weren't criminals. They weren't negligent. They were victims of an architecture built to ignore them. The assistant swallowed hard. Every dismissal, every ignored plea, it's not just neglect. It's erasure. History itself bending to a gaze that never understood them. The older archivist's voice cracked, soft, almost a whisper. And the worst part? No one ever asked their names. No one ever recorded their dignity. Only a judgment, cold and final. The clerk closed the transcript, placing it carefully on the table. Then maybe now someone must speak for them. Their names, their faces, their lives must exist in memory, if not in those files. The reporter nodded, pen poised. "We can make them exist again, not just in paper, but in truth. For the first time, maybe. Someone will see them." A quiet weight filled the room. Each voice once erased now pressed against the walls, waiting to be heard. And for a moment, the room seemed to acknowledge them, even as the files themselves stayed silent. Amara ran her fingers over the old court docket. "This one, my mother. She tried to speak." The archivist looked up, voice low. "I remember reading it. She stood there brave, but no one listened. The judge cut her off at every turn. A young assistant leaned closer. Cut her off? How? Wasn't she allowed to explain? The archivist's eyes hardened. Allowed. She was reduced to a note in a margin. Emotional, unable to stay on point. They called her passion hysteria. Her words didn't matter. Only his interpretation did. Amara swallowed hard, voice quiet but steady. She left that courtroom broken, not because she failed, but because the system refused to hear her. That's the weight I carry, isn't it? The assistant glanced at her, uneasy. It's more than weight. It's history. Erased voices, erased struggles. She wasn't just dismissed. She was silenced. The archivist's tone softened, almost a whisper. And every child she raised carried that silence forward, that quiet, heavy absence in the room, where truth should have lived. Amara's jaw tightened. I remember the fear in her eyes, how she held herself upright anyway. She didn't scream, she didn't lash out. But they wanted her to break, to beg for recognition. She refused. The young assistant scribbled, hesitant. And now, you're here. Listening, reading, giving her back the words she deserved? Amara nodded, voice steady. Yes, her story, her courage. I won't let it vanish again. I will speak for her and for every mother who ever left that room unheard. A quiet breath hung between them. The transcripts felt heavier, yet alive. Every interrupted sentence now pressed forward, claiming space. In the silence, dignity returned slowly, inch by inch, as if the room itself acknowledged a voice finally reclaimed. Amara stepped forward, folders clutched tight. Do you remember her? The clerk glanced up, uneasy. The records. Yes, your mother. But the judge, he never looked at her, not once. It was like she didn't exist. Amara's voice was calm, almost too calm. Not even when she pleaded? Not even when she tried to explain what happened? The clerk swallowed, glancing at the empty courtroom. He nodded at her words, but his eyes were elsewhere. Papers, the ceiling, anything but her. It was deliberate. Amara's jaw tightened. Indifference can be worse than anger. Anger can be argued with. Indifference, it erases you quietly. Reporter from the back stirred. You mean he didn't even consider her? Her testimony didn't count? The clerk shook his head. Count? No. She spoke, but she wasn't seen. Every question, every plea, dismissed by absence. His gaze never landed, so her presence never mattered. Amara's fingers traced the folder's edge. And that silence, that deliberate ignoring, it shapes a child, a family. It tells you that speaking, even standing, is useless. The reporter hesitated. But now, you're here. You're holding the weight of her story. Amara nodded, voice steady. Yes, I will not let the air carry her away again. I will place her in the center. Her words, her fear, her courage, they all deserve to be recognized, even if the one who should have seen her refuses. The clerk exhaled, quietly shaken. It's one thing to be judged unfairly. It's another to be invisible. And yet, here you are making them notice. Amara's eyes didn't waver. In the silence that followed, the room seemed smaller, charged. Indifference had met persistence, and slowly, just enough, acknowledgement began to rise. Her mother's voice often returned in fragments, the way old wounds do. Amara sat at that same kitchen table years later, remembering how silence filled the spaces between every sentence her mother dared to speak. They never saw me, Amara, not once. I was standing there, but to them, I wasn't. Those words clung to her like a shadow, sharper now as she faced the same men who once ignored her mother's humanity. Amara whispered, almost to herself, I heard you, Mama. I still hear you. Her colleague shifted uneasily, watching her. tighten her grip on the file. "You okay?" he asked softly. She gave a half smile. "Depends what you call okay. Carrying someone else's grief isn't the same as losing your own, but it still weighs." He looked at her carefully. "This isn't just about the case, is it?" Her silence answered more than words could. The room seemed smaller, the walls, pressing in with memories of her mother's unfinished trials, nights when dishes cooled untouched because the bitterness of injustice left no appetite, nights when her mother's trembling hands held on to rage she never allowed to spill. Amara finally spoke, her voice low but steady. "She taught me law without knowing the language of courts. Every time she told me they turned their faces away, she was teaching me what justice costs." The colleague nodded, sensing the edge of something deeper. Amara looked down, almost ashamed of the tears rising. "I wish she could see this. Not for me, for her. For the silence she swallowed so I could speak." The room stayed quiet. A grief, hidden too long, had found its way out, not through shouts, but through a whisper strong enough to fill the air. The hallway smelled of dust and old leather, of law books that had seen more silence than justice. Amara's footsteps echoed, careful but deliberate. She stopped at the office door where the old attorney, Mr. Callahan, lingered, papers trembling slightly in his hands. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said, voice low. "I had to," Amara replied. "Some things can't stay buried forever." He looked away, eyes tracing the ceiling. We all knew, you know. Every time a complaint came in, every time a mother's voice was drowned out, we knew." Amara's lips pressed together. "And?" He swallowed hard. "And we looked away. Not one of us said anything. Career, reputation, fear. It wasn't courage that kept us silent. It was survival." Her gaze sharpened. "And the people who suffered? The ones whose lives were erased while you kept your jobs intact?" Callahan's hands twisted the papers. We thought someone else would step in. We convinced ourselves the system worked, that someone someday, but no one ever did." Amara's voice softened but carried weight. That silence wasn't neutral. It was consent. Every turned head was a verdict in itself. He met her eyes briefly, the first real acknowledgement of shame. I thought I was protecting the court, protecting myself. I never wanted to see the damage we did. But it's always there, isn't it? In every file, every name we dismissed." "Yes," she whispered. "It's always there. And now someone has to face it, even if it's just us looking at the truth." He nodded slowly, a fracture forming where pride once lived. I don't know if I can make it right." Amara turned toward the door, calm, resolute. "Acknowledging it is the first step. That's all I ask." The hallway stayed quiet. Outside, the courthouse hummed with life. But inside, two people shared the weight of unspoken guilt, a silence that finally felt like confession. The meeting room smelled of polished wood and faint coffee, a space where decisions were made in tones so polite they could disguise cruelty. Amara watched from the doorway as the board members shuffled papers, their faces blank masks. "Everything is in order," said one, pushing a thick folder toward the chair at the head of the table. "Reviewed and closed," another confirmed, tapping her pen with the practiced detachment of someone who had seen this play too many times. Amara stepped inside, voice low but firm. "These files, they're not just papers. People wrote them. People suffered." A man looked up, irritation flashing briefly. "We follow procedure. Complaints were addressed according to policy." "They were dismissed without hearing," she said, each word deliberate. "Do you know what that feels like? To speak, to beg for acknowledgement, and have silence handed back?" Silence stretched across the table. A younger clerk shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the floor. Policies protect the institution, another board member said, voice brittle. They exist to maintain order, to avoid chaos. Order at the expense of justice is tyranny, Amara replied. Every signature here, every stamp, every closed case, it shields him, not the truth. The system itself has become the accomplice. The air thickened. The older members exchanged looks, subtle cracks appearing in their composed exteriors. I never thought about it like that, one muttered, almost to himself, fingers curling around the edge of the folder. Amara's eyes swept the room. Do you see now? Protection is not justice. Silence is not neutrality. Your shields only guard him, not the people whose lives you hold in your hands. The board members sank into their seats, murmuring excuses. But the words felt hollow. Outside, the courthouse thrummed as usual. Yet in that room, the illusion of order had begun to fracture. For the first time, someone named the system for what it truly was, a paper shield that could not hide the truth forever. ChatGPT said the clerk's voice was soft. Too soft. The file for your client. I can't find it. Amara's hands stayed on the table. You misplaced it again? I don't know. I swear I put it on your desk. Her eyes swept the room, papers stacked just so, pens aligned, folders that never arrived. She had seen this before, too many times to... Be coincidence. You're sure you checked the conference room? She asked, calm but cutting. Yes. I thought I did. A witness shuffled papers in the corner, hesitant. The schedule, my appointment, it was changed. Amara's jaw tightened. Changed by whom? Someone in the front office, I think. I got a call. They said I was rescheduled. The silence that followed carried more weight than any accusation. She leaned back, measured, letting the room feel the tension. Delays, misplaced files, reschedules. You call it carelessness. I call it obstruction. Someone here is making my work harder. Quietly. Heads dropped, subtle shuffles across the floor. No one spoke. Eyes flicked to one another. Look at me, she said, voice low. I'm not asking for help. I'm stating a fact. The work I do doesn't fail because of me. It fails because someone wants it to, and I will not stumble. Quietly, do you understand? Yes, a clerk whispered, almost apologetic. Yes, a witness echoed, voice shaky. Amara collected the scattered papers, stacking them herself. Every lost filing, every delayed witness, every subtle shove, she recognized it all. But recognition was power. No one challenged her. The sabotage lingered like a shadow, present but impotent against her composure. She did not raise her voice, did not accuse by name. Yet the message was clear. Quiet sabotage could try, but it would not make her fall. She straightened her papers, nodded once, and left the room, leaving the tension thick and unbroken in her wake. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and fear. Papers rustled under hesitant fingers. Amara stood at the head of the table, her hands folded, her eyes scanning faces that had tried to make her invisible. You have questions? She asked softly. The senior attorney swallowed. We thought... You thought what? Amara interrupted, not angrily, just precisely. The weight of calm made the room shift. He cleared his throat. That maybe you'd lose your composure. That the delays, the filings, the distractions would... They haven't, she said, voice steady, almost quiet. None of it has touched me, but it touches you, doesn't it? A younger associate shifted uncomfortably. I didn't mean to what? To make work harder? To make witnesses wait? To hide the truth behind bureaucracy? Her tone remained even, surgical. You should look at yourselves before blaming me for noticing it. The room went quiet. Not the polite hush of attention, but the tense, reflective silence that comes when power trembles in unexpected ways. Silence, she said, letting the word hang. It's sharper than any shout. It reveals more than anger ever could. And if you listen, you might understand that it's not submission you fear. It's accountability. No one spoke. Not a whisper, not a mutter. Only the faint ticking of a wall clock echoed. Her gaze moved slowly from one colleague to another. Each person felt the weight of their own hesitation, the quiet failure to act mirrored in her stillness. Amara picked up the scattered papers herself, stacking them with deliberate care. The work continues, she said softly. And so does the scrutiny. Inaction has a sound too. It's called silence, and it cuts deeper than any voice. She left the room without raising her voice, leaving them with the echo of their own conscience louder than anything she could have shouted. Amara stared at the folder, the thin light of her desk lamp cutting, a sharp line across its surface. She hesitated, fingers hovering. The office was empty, the quiet deep enough to hear her own heartbeat. Who would leave this? She muttered, voice barely more than a whisper. A colleague's voice, cautious, came from the doorway. You found it. I mean, are you sure? Amara lifted her eyes, calm but unshakable. I'm sure of nothing except that someone wanted me to see it. She opened the folder slowly. Transcripts, reports, notes in margins that hinted, then confirmed, what everyone had feared but never documented. Patterns of bias, dismissals, denials. Evidence. The colleague swallowed. This could ruin them. Amara's gaze didn't leave the papers. It could also ruin us if it's ignored, or if we turn away like the rest. They'd never admit it, the voice said, hesitant, almost guilty. Not Whitmore, not the board. They're protected. They're protected by silence, Amara interrupted, soft, cutting. And that's why someone leaked this. Someone believed silence wasn't enough anymore. The room shifted. Even the air seemed to tense. Do you think we can use it? She leaned back, eyes on the ceiling as if weighing every possible consequence. We can, but not recklessly. Every move we make has to be measured. They built walls of procedure, of bureaucracy, to hide this. Our patience, our precision, becomes the hammer. A long pause followed. The folder lay open between them, a quiet weapon in the shadows. Amara's fingers rested lightly on the topmost transcript. It begins here, not with a shout, not with fury, but with knowledge. And knowledge is undeniable. The colleague nodded, small, almost imperceptible. The silence that followed carried more weight than any debate could. They knew that nothing would ever be the same. Amara spread the documents across her conference table, edges overlapping, transcripts stacked like warning signs. She traced her finger along the columns of dismissed cases, noting the names, the dates, the quiet injustices carefully catalogued. Look at this, she said softly, voice steady, controlled. Every single time, similar patterns. Minorities, judged more harshly, evidence overlooked, complaints dismissed. A junior associate leaned in, hesitant. Are we seeing this clearly? I mean, is it really that consistent? Amara didn't look up. Consistent doesn't even cover it. It's systematic, calculated. Every ruling, every decision, a thread in the same fabric. The associate swallowed. So, it's not mistakes? It's policy? Yes, Amara said, flat, almost whispering. Policy by omission, policy by indifference, and policy protected by silence. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. This isn't one rogue judge, it's decades of complicity. But how do we even move forward? They built walls, procedures, paper, shields, boards that nod, adjourn, file away. Whitmore sits above it all. Amara's eyes finally met hers, calm, unbroken. That's why we document. That's why we gather every transcript, every note, every ignored report. Patterns like this don't lie. They speak louder than any protest. Another pause. Papers rustled under their fingers, a soft but insistent sound. Do you think anyone else will see it? Believe it? Amara leaned back, shoulders easing just slightly. They have to. Once you see patterns, once the truth is undeniable, there's no turning back. The system can try to resist, but patterns demand recognition. Silence filled the room. Not the emptiness of inaction, but the tense weight of clarity. Each paper, each case, a quiet revelation. Justice conditional, history rewritten, and now, finally, a record that could not be denied. The newsroom smelled of stale coffee and recycled tension. The young journalist, Malik, leaned over his desk, eyes fixed on the screen, fingers hovering above the keyboard. This is it, he murmured, almost to himself. This is the thread, the one they didn't see coming. A colleague glanced over, wary. You sure you want to touch it? Whitmore? Malik shook his head, eyes glinting with something sharper than ambition. I don't want just a story. I want the truth. They've hidden it for decades. Every folder, every transcript, it's all here. Careful, another voice warned. You know what happens when you poke at these people. Silence is their weapon. Malik's lips tightened. Silence is the weapon, but curiosity can be sharper. And for the first time, they're exposed. He flicked through the files, tracing the patterns, feeling the weight of every ignored case. Look at this. Punishments harsher, testimonies dismissed, warnings filed and forgotten. Whitmore's court wasn't a place of justice. It was a stage for controlled outcomes. The colleague stayed silent, unsettled by Malik's intensity. Do you even realize what you're holding? Careers, lives, reputations? Malik leaned back, steady, almost calm. Exactly. And that's why it matters. Whitmore wasn't invincible. He just thought he was. Reverence only protects until someone refuses to respect it blindly. A long pause settled between them. Malik's gaze returned to the screen, scanning the margins, the annotations, the quiet evidence of systemic denial. They'll feel it now, he whispered. Not fear, not yet, but the inevitability. Someone saw the pattern. Someone smelled the blood in the water. Outside, the city carried on unaware, but inside the newsroom, the air shifted. Whitmore's untouchable armor was cracking, and for the first time, curiosity wasn't just a spark, it was a blade. A quiet hum filled the hall outside Whitmore's chambers. Clerks shuffled papers nervously, stealing glances at one another. She found the patterns, one whispered, barely above the rustle of files. Patterns? Another asked, voice trembling. You mean all of them? Yes, every transcript, every dismissal. It's all mapped, the first clerk replied, eyes darting toward the heavy oak door as if it could overhear. A junior lawyer peeked in from the side. I thought no one would dare. Whitmore's untouchable. Untouchable until someone refuses to ignore it, the clerk said, shaking their head. And now it's spreading, quietly, but it's moving. The lawyer exhaled, a sharp, almost fearful sound. Do people really understand what this means? Careers, reputations, the court itself? Another voice, low and measured, interjected from the corner. Maybe that's the point. The court isn't safe from scrutiny. Not anymore. A pause lingered. Papers shifted, a chair scraped, and the room seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. You feel it? The first clerk asked. The shift? They're looking. Not just us, they're watching Whitmore. And he doesn't know what to do. Questions instead of obedience, murmured the junior lawyer, almost in awe. He thought silence protected him. Now every doubt is a mirror. The clerk leaned closer. Whispers are louder than he ever imagined. Doubt travels faster than loyalty ever could. Outside, the echo of footsteps felt heavier. Inside, uncertainty hovered, palpable, almost suffocating. Every glance carried the weight of reckoning, each question a tremor in the foundation of authority. Whitmore, isolated behind closed doors, no longer held the unquestioned power he once did. The room vibrated with the first tremors of accountability, small murmurs swelling into a chorus of scrutiny. Silence had fractured, and what remained was the piercing clarity of inquiry. ChatGPT said Amara sat at her desk, hands folded over the scattered folders, the faint hum of the office a distant pulse. Her eyes scanned each page, each line a reminder of years of quiet injustice. Are you really going to move on this? Her colleague asked, voice low, cautious. I have to, she said without looking up. Not just for me, for her. For every time she sat there and nobody listened. The colleague hesitated. It's risky. Whitmore. He's always been untouchable, Amara interrupted softly. But untouchable only lasts until someone refuses to stay silent. A pause. They both listened to the distant clatter of phones, the rustle of paper. You know people will push back. Quietly, strategically. Even allies will hesitate. Amara nodded, letting the weight settle. I've carried hesitation my whole life. It ends now. Every hidden file, every overlooked testimony, every unanswered complaint. It all leads here, her colleague swallowed. You think you can do it? Make them see without exploding? Amara's gaze lifted, steady, unflinching. I've learned that quiet can cut deeper than shouting. Silence makes them see themselves, makes them accountable in ways anger never will. Even if it destroys you? Even if it destroys me, she said, voice firm, a quiet echo of every story her mother had told at the kitchen table. Because it won't just be about me. It will be about every woman, every person silenced in that courtroom. I won't let it stay buried. The colleague nodded, sensing the irrevocable shift. Amara's resolve had become a tangible force in the room, unshakable and precise. She rose slowly, each step measured, deliberate. We start tomorrow, she said, almost a whisper, but it carried farther than any loud declaration could. And in that moment, the office, the hallways, even the echoes of the court seemed to recognize that a daughter's resolve had become the beginning of reckoning. Amara paused at the threshold, letting her gaze sweep over the courtroom. The murmurs fell silent. Even the reporters, cameras poised, seemed to sense the weight she carried. Her mother's words, spoken in quiet desperation years ago, echoed in her mind. They will never see you unless you make them. She drew a slow breath, unclenched her fists, and walked to the podium. The polished wood felt cold under her palms. She glanced at Whitmore, whose expression was carefully neutral, though the flicker in his eyes betrayed unease. Counselor. Amara Blake, the bailiff intoned. Yes, she replied, voice steady, a pause. The judge shifted slightly in his seat. Proceed. Amara unfolded the folder, letting it rest on the stand. Your Honor, members of the court, today isn't just about one case. It's about patterns, decisions, and the consequences of ignoring them. Whispers rustled through the audience, some surprised by the directness. Whitmore's jaw tightened, Her colleague leaned slightly forward. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure," she said softly, eyes scanning the room. "Every document here ties together years of choices, choices that weren't mistakes but deliberate. Every dismissed testimony, every harsher sentence, it's all here." A reporter's pen hovered over paper, capturing the shift. Whitmore cleared his throat faintly. "Are you implying—" "I'm implying the truth," Amara interrupted calmly but with undeniable weight. "The truth that has been ignored for decades." Silence filled the room. A few clerks exchanged quick glances. Lawyers adjusted in their seats. The court itself seemed to hold its breath. Amara looked down briefly, then back up, steady and unwavering. "We begin here, not to destroy, but to make accountable. And accountability starts with seeing, not just hearing." Her words hung in the air. The quiet was heavier than any shouted accusation, and the courtroom felt the gravity. Every presence sensed the shift. This was no longer business as usual. Amara shifted the folder slightly, letting the first page rest under the courtroom light. Her voice was even, calm, but each word carried the weight of years. "Your Honor, this transcript is from my mother's trial 25 years ago. Note the pattern: questions ignored, objections dismissed, testimonies devalued not on merit, but on who spoke them." She paused, letting her gaze drift to Whitmore. His fingers tapped the desk, too fast to be casual. He cleared his throat, forcing a neutral tone. "Counselor, are you suggesting—" "I am," she interrupted softly, "that the system wasn't neutral. Every decision you see documented here, every moment overlooked, builds a map. A map showing who was protected and who was made invisible." Whispers flickered across the room. A clerk shifted uneasily. A lawyer muttered, almost to himself, I thought it was just mistakes." Amara's eyes met his. "Mistakes aren't consistent. Patterns are, and patterns show intent, or at least deliberate negligence." The judge's jaw moved, fingers tightening on the gavel. Silence stretched, heavy, expectant. A reporter scribbled, eyes darting between Amara and the folder. Cameras clicked softly, but no one dared interrupt. Whitmore exhaled sharply, a brief crack in his carefully built composure. This is circumstantial." Amara's glance didn't waver. "Circumstantial? The files speak. Each denial, each dismissal, each biased judgment. They are evidence, sir. Not rumors, not whispers. Evidence." Her voice held steady. Every pause, every glance carried authority that no outburst could match. The courtroom itself seemed to lean in, absorbing the revelation. The judge's hand twitched, clerks stiffened, lawyers shifted. Even Whitmore's mask faltered as the reality pressed against it. Amara closed the folder slowly. The room remained silent, heavier than any shout could have made it. Truth was laid bare. Silence shattered. Amara's gaze swept the room slowly, letting each person feel the weight of her words. "You silenced her then," she said, voice steady. "But you will not silence me now." Whitmore's hand tightened around his notes. This is irrelevant," he stammered, voice wavering. She took a measured step forward, lowering the folder so everyone could see the highlighted pages. "Irrelevant? Every line here shows what was dismissed, ignored, erased. Justice isn't irrelevant, sir, especially when you took it from someone who deserved it." A clerk shifted uncomfortably. A junior lawyer whispered to a colleague, Did he expect this?" Whitmore's mask of calm flickered. He coughed, clearing his throat, trying to find authority in the silence. "Counselor, the law is not personal. Your argument is—" Amara cut in softly, letting her words hang. "Law is only meaningful if it protects the vulnerable. My mother was vulnerable, And every decision you made, every excuse, reinforced that vulnerability. Murmurs rose quietly across the courtroom. Even the reporters leaned forward, pens poised, cameras clicking. Softly, Whitmore's fingers trembled over the gavel. He tried again, voice strained. "This is hearsay. This—" Her eyes didn't flinch. "This isn't hearsay. These are your records, your courtroom, your decisions." She let a brief pause stretch, letting the words settle into the heavy air. Power is not measured by title or position. It is measured by accountability. Today, that balance shifts. The judge exhaled, a subtle nod acknowledging the change. Lawyers who had once nodded obediently now hesitated, caught between allegiance and the undeniable truth laid bare. Whitmore's face paled. He swallowed, glanced around, realizing the weight of every eye. Silence enveloped him. Not the obedient quiet he commanded, but the suffocating scrutiny of a room that knew he had faltered. Amara closed the folder with calm authority, letting her final words linger. The courtroom collectively shivered. Authority crumbled. Whitmore's shoulders sagged imperceptibly, though the courtroom felt it. He gripped the edge of the bench, knuckles white, eyes darting toward familiar faces that now avoided his gaze. A clerk whispered to another, barely audible, You see that? He's lost it." Amara remained poised, her hands folded over the folder, eyes steady. "You once hid behind these walls," she said softly, letting the words carry beyond him. "But hiding doesn't erase responsibility." Whitmore's lips parted, a dry cough escaping before he could speak. "Counselor, this is highly irregular," he muttered, voice cracking just enough to betray panic. A reporter leaned forward, pen hovering over the notepad. "Sir, are you able to respond?" He shook his head faintly, fumbling with papers that now seemed irrelevant, useless against the wave building quietly but unstoppable. Amara's voice cut through again, deliberate, calm. "Every choice, every dismissal, every quiet injustice, those are your decisions. They belong to you, not to shadows." Murmurs rose. A camera clicked. A phone camera lit up. News feeds would carry it beyond these walls. The judge's authority, once untouchable, trembled visibly under the quiet force of undeniable truth. Whitmore's gaze dropped to the bench. He cleared his throat, but nothing coherent emerged. His breath came in short, shallow bursts. Silence had become his enemy, and Amara's composed presence his mirror. A junior lawyer swallowed, whispering, I never—" Amara nodded slightly toward the gallery, eyes meeting those of the young attorneys. "It's never too late to see clearly," she said, voice low, resolute. Whitmore's hands loosened on the papers. The room exhaled collectively. The collapse, subtle but absolute, radiated outward. The world beyond these walls would know. Amara folded her folder and stepped back, letting the quiet hang like a verdict. Authority had crumbled, but dignity had not. Whitmore walked through the courthouse steps, briefcase in hand, eyes fixed straight, ahead. The press hovered, flashes snapping like staccato beats, but he didn't glance up. A reporter called, voice sharp, "Judge Whitmore, any comment on your resignation?" He shook his head slowly, voice low. No comment. Crowds of former. Colleagues passed him, stiff nods, careful avoidance. One clerk muttered under her breath, "He used to command respect. Now—" She trailed off, shaking her head. At a coffee shop, he sat alone, stirring his drink. A familiar voice hesitated near his table. "Sir, are you all right?" Whitmore didn't answer. He stared into the liquid, seeing reflections of a life built on authority, now fractured. Letters from friends went unopened. Calls from his daughter rang unanswered, echoing in a quiet house that once held laughter. The world outside respected him no longer, and the walls seemed to shrink, leaving him exposed. A neighbor approached hesitantly, clearing her throat. "Harold, can we talk?" He exhaled slowly, barely audible. I have nothing to say." Even the streets seemed altered, people crossing before he could meet their gaze, whispers following like shadows. Authority had been replaced by avoidance, reverence replaced by caution, fear replaced by indifference. At home, he touched a framed photograph of his daughter and wife, his hand trembling. The isolation pressed against his chest, heavier than any public humiliation. Silence had become a mirror, reflecting every compromised choice, every silent injustice. He sat back in the chair, empty rooms surrounding him. A life once lived at. The center of power had been reduced to echoes, whispered warnings, and unanswered questions. Outside, the city moved on, unconcerned. Inside, he felt the slow, inescapable weight of solitude. Whitmore exhaled again, the sound small, almost a surrender. The Titan had fallen. Amara stepped onto the worn path, each footfall soft against the damp earth. The cemetery smelled of rain and pine, still and solemn. She held the folded notes close, courtroom transcripts that had shattered a lifetime of silence. A breeze stirred the leaves. She reached her mother's grave, hands trembling slightly. The engraved letters were familiar, almost intimate. "Mom," she whispered, voice catching. "They finally saw." She knelt, placing the notes gently on the headstone. No one was there to witness, no cameras, no applause. Just the weight of memory and the quiet satisfaction of truth acknowledged. A neighbor, tending nearby flowers, gave a careful nod. "She would be proud," the voice said softly. Amara didn't respond immediately, simply touching the stone. She remembered the endless courtroom silences, her mother's dignity in the face of derision, the gavel banging down judgment that was anything but fair. Every line she had read aloud had been a reclamation, a restoration of justice that had been denied for decades. Her eyes traced the engraved letters, and she thought of her mother's steady gaze during those trials. "I did it, Mom," she whispered again, letting the words float with the wind. "I carried your silence and turned it into voice." The cemetery remained hushed, every shadow and every stone bearing witness. She folded her hands, breathing in the quiet. Tears fell, but they were not for sorrow alone. They were for resilience, for dignity, for a life erased, now remembered. A bird called somewhere above, wings slicing the gray sky. Amara stood slowly, the notes left as a quiet testament. There would be no speeches, no headlines here, only the echo of justice, soft but enduring, speaking louder than gavel, louder than fear, louder than the walls that had once contained her mother's voice. She walked away with a steady step, carrying not just her mother's memory, but the weight of every silence finally broken. Amara adjusted the microphone, feeling the weight of every eye on her, every lens pointed, every pen poised. She spoke softly at first, then louder, letting each word settle like a stone in the air. "Justice is not measured by titles or years on the bench," she began, voice steady, deliberate. She paused, letting the phrase hang. The room stilled. Even the journalists scribbling notes stopped, sensing the gravity. Her gaze swept across the crowd. "It is measured by who still believes in it when it fails them most." The words cut through the murmurs, simple, unadorned, yet heavier than any proclamation of authority. Cameras clicked, but the attention wasn't just for spectacle. It was recognition. Recognition of a truth that had outlasted silenced voices, that had waited patiently for someone to speak. A reporter leaned forward. "Are you suggesting the system itself has failed?" "Yes," she said, almost whispering, yet every syllable rang clear. It has failed my mother. It has failed countless others. But the measure of justice is not in its failures alone. It is in those who remember, who act, who endure beyond the walls and titles that tried to contain them. Some faces in the room shifted, uncomfortable. Some nodded quietly, understanding without needing elaboration. The weight of her words didn't provoke anger. It demanded reflection, leaving no room for denial. Her voice softened, almost to herself, but still audible. We cannot leave truth buried. We cannot let silence be our legacy. We owe justice to those who could not see it, to those who were erased before they could speak. She straightened, looked into the lenses, then lowered her gaze briefly, as if drawing strength from the ground beneath her. A pause lingered. No applause yet, no fanfare, only the resonance of truth, calm and unwavering, stretching past the microphones, past the cameras, beyond the fleeting authority of the past. And in that hush, her message endured. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and dust, sunlight slanting through tall windows, cutting lines across the empty benches. Amara paused at the doorway, letting the quiet wrap around her like a soft cloak. No cameras, no reporters, only the muted echo of her own footsteps on the marble floor. She ran a hand along the edge of the railing, remembering the tension that had filled this space just days ago, the shuffling papers, the hushed breaths, the judge's strained composure. A janitor swept in the corner, nodding briefly. He didn't ask, didn't speak. The air had changed. Everyone felt it. Walls that had witnessed decades of authority now seemed to bend slightly, acknowledging the shift, holding the memory of voices that refused to stay buried. Amara whispered, to herself, almost unheard. One voice can't erase history, but one voice can remind it to listen. She moved toward the courtroom, noticing the abandoned gavel on the bench. It gleamed faintly in the late light, powerless, a symbol of what had been and what no longer held sway. In the silence, she recalled the faces of those who had trembled beneath authority, the ones who'd carried quiet despair for too long. And she thought of her mother, whose courage had been delayed by years but not extinguished. Amara placed her notes gently on the bench, as if offering them to the building itself. "This is what truth feels like," she said softly. No clamor, no applause, just presence, just recognition. Outside, the wind shifted, scattering fallen leaves across the courthouse steps. The world moved on, yet this place held the echo of justice, subtle, enduring. A space once heavy with fear now breathed lightly, a quiet monument to dignity reclaimed. She turned, stepping out, leaving the courthouse standing, unchanged in stone but altered in spirit, the echo of one story, lingering far longer than any gavel ever could.